Hey there, Mrs. Rycraft here again, and this time I'm going to talk to you about Remember, a poem by Christina Rossetti. Okay, as before, last time, what I want you to do is to click on this link and listen carefully to the poem read out loud, remembering that poetry is a form of literature that is meant to be listened to and heard and felt, not just read off of a page. Exactly the same way as song lyrics, poetry needs to be heard. Okay. Now you've done that, let's talk about the poem itself. Well, first of all, we need to talk about Christina Rossetti. She was born in 1830 and died in 1894. Age 64, really not a bad age at all for a Victorian woman. She was part of a group of writers and painters known as the Pre-Raphaelites, and she had a very famous brother called Dante Gabriel Rossetti. He wrote and he painted, and he was perhaps the most famous, reckless romantic of the Victorian era. There are a whole load of them, and if you research the Pre-Raphaelites, you'll be able to find out more about them if you're at all interested. For our purposes, that's all you really need to know. She was a very well-known Victorian female poet, and some might argue the most famous one. That's after you take out Elizabeth Barrett Browning. There's a picture of her drawn by her brother in somewhat of a thoughtful mood. She was engaged to a chap called James Collinson when she was a teenager, and she broke it off in 1850 because he converted to Catholicism. Herself, along with her sister and her mother, had been particularly staunch members of the Church of England, and therefore his religion and her religion really didn't go well together, and at that point she broke off their engagement. Basically, that's all you really need to know about her to make sense of this poem. So let's move on. This poem is a sonnet. Unlike Shakespearean sonnet, it's a Petrarchan sonnet. It is formed of an octet, which is 8 lines, and a sestet, which is 6 lines. Both of these two sections have their own separate rhyme scheme. If you look here, I've separated the sections and I've annotated the rhyme scheme. So you can see A, B, B, A, B, B, A in the octet, and C, D, D, E, C, E in the sestet. What you need to do is to think carefully about what the two different rhyme schemes do. Read it out loud to yourself, taking a short pause in between the octet and the sestet so that you start to understand how the different rhyme schemes reinforce the different meanings of the two sections of this poem. We think about the repetition in this poem. The word remember is used 5 times. It's coupled with the word me 3 times. Gone away is in there a couple of times, turn and turning, and day by day. Looking back at all the ways these words are used, do you think that it echoes a desire to be remembered? Do you think it echoes a desire to be held in the forefront of the memory of the man she is talking to? So what does she ask for in the octet? Look it over really closely and think to yourself what you think she considers silent land to mean. What's she saying when she talks about the future you planned? Is there significance in the use of the word you? Does this reflect the role of the Victorian woman, or is this simply reflecting the role of a more dominant man? And finally, think about the word order of the phrase turn to go yet turning. It's a bit squiffy, isn't it? So think about why she's done what she's done and why she's moved things around the way she has. Here's the poem again so you can read over that first section. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you'd planned. Only remember me, you understand, it will be late to counsel then or pray. What's she saying? There's lots of me's and you's, not many us's. In fact, none at all. So in the sestet, that's the second half of the poem, she uses the word forget twice and the word remember twice. Is there more balance here? Are the scales equalled out? Is she starting to think about regretting and forgetting rather than remembering constantly? What about the way she uses the word yet right at the beginning of the sestet? Yet. Is she pausing to think? What does she mean by darkness and corruption? Certainly when I think of the word corruption, I think of evil. I'm not entirely sure that's what she means, but you might want to mull it over a little bit and see what conclusions you come to yourself. The last thing I want you to do is to consider the last two lines, which for me are the most hopeful of the whole poem. Back to it again. Yet, if you should forget me for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that I once had, better by far you should forget and smile than you should remember and be sad. I think those last two lines are extremely hopeful, positive, and somewhat full of love, really. She's saying to the man that she's speaking to, actually, I'd rather you forgot about me and smiled a bit and had a nice life than you constantly remembering me and walking around in sadness. This poem is extremely popular at funerals. It's often read. In fact, soap opera funerals are completely proliferated by this poem. I remember it at least 3 times in EastEnders and probably a couple of times in Neighbours as well. But think about what the tone is. Is the tone miserable and funerary? Or is the tone actually hopeful and saying, let me go, let me move on to a better place? Look at that 9th line. Chart the change at the word yet. All this sadness taken into consideration. Yet, if you do forget me, and then remember a little bit, don't feel sad, and don't feel angry or upset with yourself for forgetting. Let yourself move on. Thinking about the individual words, realistically there's not much I wanted to draw to your attention, but I did want you to think about the word counsel. Counsel means to advise. It would be where two people would sit down and talk together about something. Any of you that have had any reason to take advice from a mentor or somebody older in your family, or perhaps somebody within your church or religion, and perhaps even within school itself, your form tutor or Mrs. Earl, those kind of people, you know that you don't just sit there and listen to what people tell you to think about and what they have to say to you. You discuss things and you take advice and you ask questions, and that's what she's saying. She's saying that when she's dead, it will be too late to ask her advice. So think about it. Also think about the way she's messed about with the word order. It is a bit all over the place. Think about the way that it's done to make the iambic ti-dum, ti-dum, ti-dum rhythm work. In a sonnet, you've got 10 syllables, and they ti-dum, ti-dum, ti-dum in those syllables. 10 syllables, yes, 5 lots of ti-dums in each line. Sorry about that. And those syllables actually make the rhythm and make the poem bounce along. It can seem oddly positive for some of the downbeat poetry that you will read in this anthology, but it's part of the discipline of the form. And remember, if you've listened already to what I had to say about Sonnet 116, they're tricky beasts to write and to write well. And so getting that iambic rhythm to work properly sometimes means that you have to mess about a little bit with the word order. And that's what Rossetti's done here. It makes her words sound a little bit archaic and old-fashioned, but ultimately that's where she's going with it. So, because of the line about counsel or pray, it's often thought that this poem is actually written to James Collinson, the man that she broke off her engagement with. Remember, I told you about that right at the beginning. And it's telling him that if he doesn't sort himself out when she's dead, that he won't be able to convert back and talk to her or take some advice. And actually, if you consider it in that light, it's a bit mean and it's a little bit harsh. So you might want to consider that perhaps this poem isn't one of self-sacrifice and one of, oh, don't worry about me when I'm gone, don't worry about me when I'm dead, but actually one of, when I'm dead, it will be too late for you to say, sorry, mate. So sort yourself out. Have a think about it in those terms and see if that makes any sense to you. Remembering, of course, that when you're looking for those high-grade answers, you're looking for alternative interpretations. So don't just take one interpretation as the gospel. Look at different ways of thinking about these poems. Dig into them and think about them hard. So, this is my little go at making it make sense in modern terms. I haven't written it in poetry. I've actually just written it in straightforward, no holds barred this is how it is kind of statements. Have a little read, and I hope that it helps you to make sense of what the poet's going on about. So, for me, that's Remembered by Christina Rossetti. Hope you enjoy this, and I hope you have every success in your GCSE in the summer. Good luck, everybody.